Hi, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kerrigan. I'm an anthropologist at the University of the West Indies, St Augustine campus. I'm also employed as as a political sociologist there, and I have a regular column in the Sunday Guardian, the Trinidad Guardian newspaper.
Great. Why do you think producing anthropology for the public is important?
Why do I think producing anthropology for the public is important? Well, in many ways, I think that producing anthropology for the public is important in a purely informational sense. I think it's important in many ways to just get out the anthropological perspective and the anthropological imagination, to offer some insights about human experience to the wider public. I think that anthropology has an ability to provide a sort of bottom-up lens on many issues in society, so things that aren't necessarily top down and legislated for, and kind of things that more emerge from the people, and sort of a perspective on everyday life that more comes out of the experience of people. And I feel that that's an important part of life and of information that needs to be shared. Another reason I think getting anthropology out to the public is important is because of the critical thinking aspect. A lot of the time in sort of the mainstream media, news programs, in newspapers, what we get is a sanitized kind of very stereotypical type of information. And I think anthropology provides a more kind of critical lens on that sort of information. It sort of can provide more in-depth answers to a lot of the kind of things that are popular in the news. For instance, Ebola, how Ebola is a disease of poverty as much as anything else. That sort of gets lost in the sort of the fear-mongering that's out there, and sort of talking about Paul Farmer or stuff like that is a good way to sort of open up the issues with more depth. The similar thing happened with same-sex marriage. I found that the anthropology had a very important role to play in sort of explaining the realities of marriage and other arrangements that have taken place around the world across time. So in many ways I think that anthropology by nature has a sort of public aspect to it. We see life in ways that are very important and not necessarily are in ways that are not necessarily included in the mainstream popular press. So I think it's very important for anthropologists to make things public, because we provide a sort of lens and a piece of information and a kind of form of critical thinking that you don't really get in the normal sort of press.
Great, thank you. How did you get into popular anthropology, and what do you do with it?
How did I get into public anthropology, and why did I get into it? Well, I guess that's kind of a cool story. Obviously, there's always lots of different influences on your life. When I was doing my PhD at American University in Washington, D.C., they had a public anthropology program, which wasn't actually what my degree program was, but I took a number of courses in that program. And also, I was very close to a couple of the professors in that program, including Dr. David Vine and Dr. Brett Williams, who really sort of inspired me with their own writings and public sort of engagement. David Vine would take his work about military bases, and Brett Williams would take her work about poverty in South DC, and they would find ways to get it into the mainstream press, and they'd find ways to get it onto public radio stations, or they would get it into documentaries. That's very inspiring when you're a student to see your professors do that. So there was that aspect. Another aspect was that I had a journalism background. I had been a feature writer for 5 or 6 years before I started my PhD in anthropology, so I was bringing a kind of familiarity and an ease to write for the public into my kind of anthropology anyway. So I didn't have that fear. I guess another thing that I tried to do was I tried to sort of pitch a column to the daily newspapers the dailies in Trinidad. So I pitched a column to a newspaper called the Newsday, that I wanted to write some anthropology of power columns about who has power in Trinidad and Tobago, why do they have power, how do they get it, what do they do with it. And I remember really my first pitch was at my field site. There was an issue of power going on. Some members of the community were ignoring the law, and they tried to seize a piece of land from some footballers who were using the land and following the law. And I felt that there was a way that these people who were trying to take the land grab were using the privilege that was historically given in the society because of various race and class factors. So I basically wanted to make that public. Quite complicated issues, but I felt like there was a way, if I got it into the press, it would improve people's understanding of what was really happening, rather than the sort of the token mainstream media representation. So I wasn't getting through with the Newsday. They never really were responding to me after kind of a couple of months. So I sent it to another editor at the Guardian, and the same day she read it. She said she liked it. She said she's willing to do it. She said she was willing to pay me for it, which is always great as an anthropologist. You don't often always get paid for the things you put in the press. So once she offered me money, that was also something that was quite attractive. And she asked me if I would be willing to do a column every week, which I agreed to do. And that was in 2012, so I've been doing the column now for 2 years. After the first year, I asked if maybe I could go to every 2 weeks, so now I do it more of a bi-weekly, just because I found that as much as I enjoyed writing the columns every week, it was taking away from my academic writing, and with the whole kind of publish and perish of pressures of the university, I felt like I couldn't put all my effort into being a public anthropologist. I kind of had to tack back. So now I do it every 2 weeks, and I actually do it for the Sunday Guardian, which in a way was a bit of a promotion from their weekly, from the Monday issue to the Sunday issue, and so that's going quite well. I guess in terms of what do I also do, I use the public anthropology columns not just as ways to inform the public. I also use them as devices for my first year undergrads in my Intro to Anthro class. I find that they often complain about the readings, that they're too long, that they don't like them. So my column's only 750 words, which you find makes you actually into a better writer, but it's also the sort of length that undergraduate students would read. So I often will write columns every now and again about concepts in anthropology like culture, cultural relativity, biological anthropology, gender, race and class, so that I know that my students will have read them, and I'll always pull in local examples of these things so that they can see them in their lives. As I mentioned, I also teach political sociology, so sometimes my columns aren't strictly public anthropology. Sometimes they're political sociology based as well, and I'll talk more about politics, politicians. I'll bring in people like Weber, CLR James, Audrey Lorde, to sort of open up these things for the everyday audience. You know, who becomes a politician and why? You know, those are interesting questions that a political sociologist can answer. And the final thing I also do with my columns is for my postgraduates. I have op-ed workshops as part of the coursework they've got to do for their postgrad seminar. So again, going back to my anthropology at American University, Professor Brett Williams had an assignment called Keepers and Queries, which was, you know, you had to write about an idea you want to keep, and you also, a query was really, you had to kind of pose a question that you didn't know the answer to for the rest of the society, for the class rather. And I found that Keepers and Queries are a very good way to develop a student's public writing abilities. So what we do is we do the Keepers and Queries, but in the second semester, the second part of the course, we have op-ed workshops where the assignment is we develop their op-eds, they send them to me, I give them some feedback, we develop them, and then we send them to the newspapers. And of a class of about 20 last semester, we got 12 published in the newspapers. And you see that the students really, you know, these postgrads, when they start seeing that their ideas and their ways of thinking can be turned into quite successful pieces in the newspaper, that you see them viewing academia and the power of what they're learning in new ways. So I often see this kind of public anthropology and op-ed writing more generally as a way to empower my students, and I find that the postgrads that do this activity with me will tell me certain things like that they feel more empowered. So I feel it's quite successful in that way.
So what is it that you like about your chosen medium as a way of communicating?
What is it that I like about the chosen medium, about my chosen medium as a way of communicating? Okay. Well, I guess touching on some of the things I've mentioned. So one of the things I like is the frequency, that it's regular, that people know that I'm constantly in the newspaper, right? So every week they can, or every 2 weeks, they can look forward or engage with something from an anthropological perspective. So I know it's consistent and constant. So there's a kind of an anthropological voice that is consistent and readily available to the general public. So on that sense, I think it's really important. The other thing I like is the 750 words. When I first pitched the column, I wanted a 1,000-word column, and the editor told me I could get 850 words, so I kind of bent to that. And then on my first column, she cut a bit and said to me that I could only have 750 words, and at which point I told her, the editor, that I didn't want to do the column anymore because it was too many, it was not enough words. And she was very, very calm and calm with me, and she suggested that actually what I would learn from trying to get these ideas into 750 words is it would make me a better writer. And of course, lo and behold, that's exactly what it does. You know, having to write to that kind of concise level makes you a much better writer and helps you to really be clear on what your message is and your point is. You realise, you know, coming from an academic background, that you want to kind of deal with all these ideas and put them in your piece, but you realise that with 750 words you can really only deal with one idea. Do you know what I mean? So the frequency is important. I think the 750 words makes it concise, makes it punchy, makes it easy to sort of swallow. I enjoy the sort of the popular nature of it, that I'm engaging with non-academics, so that I can, you know, I can tap back and not have to use the academic language that can be a bit kind of contrived and dense and difficult for people to sort of access. So you kind of try to find new ways to talk about things that we might talk about, like, you know, power or privilege. You know, what are other ways you can sort of talk about those things? The other thing I really like is the contemporary nature of it. I often find that during the week I read something in the newspaper or see something on the news that's very public, that people are kind of engaging in the society, or people are talking about on the radio, or somebody talks about it in my class, and suddenly it might connect to you know, my anthropological mindset, or something I'm reading for class or I'm researching, and that way the articles kind of bring in what's happening in the world today and then connect to this kind of larger anthropology. So I love that kind of contemporary nature of it. And also the whole way I can often sort of talk about politics and culture. You know, everything that sort of happens that's in the mainstream and that's popular has some kind of angle towards power or politics or culture, which are all things I was interested in anyway, so I can always pull those in. So yeah, I guess that the frequency, the word count, this popular nature, the contemporariness of it, all those things make me feel like my anthropology is actually sort of relevant, right? Rather than having to wait for 2 years to you know, submit to a journal, get the revisions, you know, maybe get a rejection, maybe go to another journal. By the time you kind of get out what your article is, about 2 years have gone by. You know, with anthropology, I could interview somebody 1 week, with my column rather, I could interview somebody 1 week, and the next week is in the paper. So there's that that kind of like immediacy about public and popular anthropology that I feel is one of the real kind of one of the real sort of gems of the whole kind of experience, that you feel relevant.
What other kinds of media by popular anthropologists do you engage with?
Well, that's a good one. So Erin Taylor does a great site, Pop Anth, which I always kind of look at, and I love the way that she, you know, the website pulls in people from all around the world in this sort of popular anthropology frame. I wish I had more time to write for her, because I do feel that it's a very worthwhile project. One thing I did mention to Erin was that because I get paid, it sort of makes your loyalty for my column in the newspaper, it makes your loyalty to public anthropology sort of, you know, slightly, it takes it off being trying to place it everywhere. You feel that you have a responsibility to the job in a way, which is sort of a negative kind of thing. But there's lots of other popular writers in anthropology. So Gabrielle Hussein, who is an anthropologist at UE where I work, writes the Diary of a Working Mother weekly, which I feel is a brilliant column which deals with a lot of issues in modern world and sort of through the lens of gender, and I think that's very important. Alyssa Trotz up in Canada is a very popular, is an anthropologist again who deals with the sort of public anthropology and popular through her own column, which sometimes comes out in a Guyanese newspaper, so I'm familiar with that. I do deal with looking at sort of, you know, videos that people post, podcasts I find that are quite interesting online. I do think that there could be some sort of central repository or some sort of central online space where you could go and find links to all the anthropologists that are writing publicly for that week or that month. But we don't really have that. Savage Minds does that, but I find that for instance, they've never included a column I've written about in anthropology, in public anthropology in 2 years. You know, they always seem to be centered on American anthropologists in America, and also their definition of what they think public anthropology and what I think public anthropology doesn't really fit. So in a way, I feel like mainstream anthropology, especially a lot of our online spaces, actually is involved in sort of prolonging the invisibility of many of these kind of public anthropology columns. Obviously that's not the whole field. I feel like some people, some colleagues are always retweeting my columns, and you know, that's very useful. But I do feel that there's a way that writing out the Caribbean doesn't sort of get picked up by the bigger world. It's almost like the Caribbean's invisible. So I find that kind of negative. But you know, I try to engage anybody writing out the Caribbean in a public anthropology sense. Jodiana Sinanan is somebody else who occasionally has a column in the UK Guardian and also some Australian newspapers. So yeah, so I guess what I deal with the public anthropologists I'm already familiar with, the names I've mentioned, plus a few others. Like there's the New Scientist writer whose name I can't remember right now. You know, so, or the various voices you see on the Huffington Post, I try to engage with them as well. So I definitely look out for other anthropologists writing in the papers. I sometimes listen to podcasts, sometimes engage with blogs, and more specifically, I guess, Pop Anth itself is something I go to quite a lot.
Okay, what about exhibitions or conferences?
Exhibitions and conferences, I guess I engage with those as well, but they're a little less obvious, or in terms of frequency and numbers of those things, a little less. So I will often do public lectures, like for instance, so Trinidad is quite a homophobic society, so one of the things I've had to do occasionally is go into churches and give public kind of talks on things I feel are quite difficult subjects. So I do go out and try to give those sort of talks. But in terms of specifically exhibitions and what was the other one? It was exhibitions and
conferences.
And conferences. I guess I engage with those a little bit less. But I think that's you know, something that I should do a bit better with. I think there's a way that you could make those more popular.
How would you like to see popular anthropology develop in the future? And what do you think the main challenges are?
Okay, how do I see popular anthropology developing in the future, and what might be some of the main challenges? Well, I think that for me, public anthropology, popular anthropology, you know, getting anthropology in the newspapers, making it sort of part of the daily dose of what people kind of consume in terms of information is very important. I think that it should be mainstream. I think anthropologists have a responsibility to, you know, connect and offer their insights to everyday living and life and people, and I think that anthropologists need to try to reach out to editors on a regular basis to try and get their expertise into the newspapers. So in that sense, I think one of the things I'd like to see is popular anthropology become more mainstream. You know, TV included. You know, I want to see more anthropologists as commentators on news programs, as you know, offering consultancy to people making documentaries.
Is there any advice that you'd like to give to people who are just starting out to produce popular anthropology?
What advice would I give to people just starting out trying to produce public anthropology? Well, one of the first things I had to do was develop my writing voice, because your public anthropology, your popular anthropology voice will be distinct. You can't really get away with the sort of obtuse and dense nature of academic speak. So you need to develop that writing voice for the newspaper. So one of the things I did was I pitched a few columns to friends and colleagues, family, to try and get some ideas of what worked, what didn't work. I learned that I was trying to put too much into a column. I was trying to, you know, tackle too many ideas. So you learn to step back from that. The other thing I suggest is, you know, talking with editors about building a relationship with them. I feel that editors are open to interesting columnists that can bring new insights to stuff that's in the popular press. So, you know, work on that relationship. I would also suggest don't be shy, ask for money. This is not publish or perish, where we do it all for free, where our labour is sort of involved in the process. You know, newspapers can pay, so don't be shy to ask for money for a column in a newspaper. So yeah, so I think in many ways I would suggest choose an angle. My angle was, and the snippet I gave to the editor was, I want to write anthropology of power columns in Trinidad. Who has power, why they have power, how they use power, how they got power, and in that way it opens up basically everything in the daily newspapers to an anthropological lens. So find that kind of angle, develop it. I often keep a folder on my desktop with possible ideas. I also have my writing practice down to a particular time period. I can write 750 words and edit those 750 words in 4 hours. You know, an hour to really get down the basics, 2 hours for really editing, and then like another hour for just playing with it at a final time, thinking it through. So once you get that down, you kind of know exactly how long it takes you to produce. You've got a bunch of ideas in a folder ready to go in case you're having a bad week and you can't think of anything, but it doesn't really work like that. You always think of something relevant. Often I find that the stuff I'm reading for school, for my classes, or to teach, or for my academic research becomes relevant, so I'll use the literature that I'm reading at that moment to open up things. So yeah, choose an angle, develop it, keep working on it. Pitch it to not just your, you know, the editor, to people who you respect and like, and who have your best interests at heart, because they'll tell you what works and doesn't work, and enjoy it. In many ways, you know, I enjoy the public persona. I enjoy having a way to engage people in a popular sense. So, you know, I think once you enjoy it, that sort of adds to the whole process. Again, it doesn't really feel like work. So yeah, so really choose an angle, develop it, work on it, pitch it, and sort of enjoy it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.